Hi, everyone. Once again, welcome to this session called Engaging Schools and Communities in Development. So we are going to listen to cases of school management and nutrition. My name is Damir Isinaliyev. I'm one of the organizers of this conference, and I'm replacing Anel Kulakhmetova from University of Central Asia. She had a family need to stay at home. Her mom was under surgery, so something unexpected, so I'm replacing her. Today we will have three speakers. First with Temirlan, talking about their work on schools and communities. We have Aida, Abdyldaeva, and Philipp Schröder, presenting the joint work on nutrition, on intervention funded by USAID. Not taking too much time, I'd like to explain that Temirlan is going to talk, and then we will have time for questions. And then Aida and Philipp will talk, and then for both of them, we will have joint session for questions. Yeah, so that's the plan. And if there is time, then we will also have more questions to Temirlan. Temirlan, thank you for applying and speaking on behalf of many people who we know. And floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Damir, and glad to see all of you here today on this presentation. When I was attending all these sessions today, I realized that the people here represent different areas. And supposedly because it was organized by the university, and judging by the questions that people are asking, people are quite well familiar with the research, different methods that are used. And at the same time, there are people who are less familiar with the different research methods that are typically applied, but more on the international kind of program implementation side. So I'll try to address both target groups and see how it goes. By the way, yeah, no, I'll stick to English, yeah, if it's okay. I mean, the presentation is developed in English, so, but if you want kind of more clarification, I can switch to Russian as well. So this presentation is about the project. It's over 5 years old project implemented by Aga Khan Foundation with the financial assistance from the government of Japan and World Bank. It was aimed to improve the school system by engaging different community members into the school education process. That was a really good idea because, as it was mentioned a number of times, I mean, education is quite important in many ways for the future of the country, for giving social and economic lift to the local people. Because I think Alisher quite clearly today in the morning session stated that without education, yeah, it's going to be difficult to maintain this. What's it called? Economic well-being of the people. He put it differently, but I interpret it that way. Okay, so the overall aim of the project was to improve the governance and performance of school by involving local communities. It's an interesting idea. It's good. And our involvement, by the way, I represent not Aga Khan Foundation. I present independent research company called Empirica, and we were involved into conducting baseline and as well as endline studies and trying to see the impact of the project. So that was our involvement. Just briefly about the project itself, the overall logic and idea. It started by developing on something called BOT. BOT, it's called Board of Trustees, Попечительский совет in Russian. Yeah. So there was a lot of attempts trying to kind of formalize this entity. There is a legislation on that. However, in every it was interpreted slightly differently, and the starting point was to start.
Да, вот это был как-то индикатор того, что они что-то...
Yeah. So it started by trying to improve and to standardize this approach to Board of Trustees, basically bringing it to accordance with the legislation. Because existing at that stage, the existing Board of Trustees were in conflict with legislation. Legislation said one thing, you come to school, and the actual fact was contradicting to the legislation. So they had to bring it in accordance with the legislation. They developed guides, education material, videos, and made it consistent throughout all these 354 project schools. The next step was forming and training community facilitators. That was an important point because, again, in number of presentations today, it was mentioned about the importance of bringing all stakeholders around one table, because if you forget someone, then the likelihood of a big impact is going to be small. So what happened here? The pupil, students from school, teachers, school management, local important stakeholders in the communities, as well as parents, were all brought into one table and formed a board of trustees, as well as within each of these communities, so-called community facilitator groups were formed, established. That is an important point because you will see from the next steps. So what the idea was to identify the needs of each stakeholder or of each stakeholders. For example, the assumption was that like students have different needs than their parents. So what happened? These facilitators would form a discussion among their groups and trying to say, if you had a chance to improve in school, what that would be. Like, let's say, name 3 things. Students would name probably, we want computer classes, we want something else. And you ask the same question from parents, and they say, we want guard at the front door, and we want something else. You ask teachers, they said, we need a toilet. So different different stakeholders have different perception of what is needed for school. And these facilitators went through different meetings and talks. I mean, the technicality of it is really detailed. They had a really strong methodology. They sent the papers, they organized kind of mini surveys, and then they ranked all these needs in each group, and then they revealed the needs of each group, and then held a group meeting, and then basically they ended up having a master list of what is needed for school. After that, they developed a joint action plan. That's just the middle point here. Joint action plan, and who is responsible for what. After that, they kind of started talking to different stakeholders, for example, local community members, parents, local businesses, trying to find the financial sources to address those needs. And what was interesting, which I will probably mention later on as well, when firstly, when all this discussion took place, more people became aware of the existing problems in school, and then straight away they started saying, I can do this, I can do that, which didn't happen before. And even local businesses themselves started, when they see the transparent process, which was participated by local actors, as well as had a control and transparent mechanisms, they became more eager to help schools, which was also an interesting finding. And in the end, what I liked about this project is when Aga Khan put all this structure in place, in the end, they said, we're gonna give certain amount of grants and all schools can just write their projects, proposals, and submit it to us. And when schools were given grants, they basically went through the same process once again. So that the logic behind it was, we gave you the process, let's now kind of fortify it, yeah, strengthen it by actually putting into the work. And that was the logic of the project. And now all this talk was about the project, yeah. It's our involvement as evaluators. We would come and say, okay, that's nice. How we can assess the impact of the project? Who is familiar with the research? You'll probably know that there are different methods, mainly qualitative and quantitative tools. In this study, we used mixed method approach, which means that both qualitative and quantitative tools were used. We tried to conceptualize everything, all these key stakeholders into one single visual diagram, and basically we came up with something like that. The key players were parents, students, board of trustees in the middle, and school management, as well as other stakeholders. All these red points in the middle, that's the indicators that we had to measure and see if there was any change from the baseline levels. People who are more into research, probably you would find it interesting because we're getting into a little bit more technical area. We used kind of experimental design, which is in social science not quite possible, so it's called quasi-experimental design. This design implies like what people do. They measure the indicators at the baseline and end line, and they check the difference, right? If there is any difference, and then logically you could say, oh, that's the impact of the project. However, that's not always the case, because even if the project was not there, there would be some dynamic, right? So what happens to account for that, we also included the control schools, which didn't have any project impact. And the assumption was that the development in project schools would have been the same as in control schools. And then basically taking the difference, we would say that is the actual impact of the project. If someone is interested, it's called difference in difference. Actual statistical what is that tool that we used is called difference in difference. We could discuss that in more detail if you want. But as I said, the main assumption was that the project schools would have developed the same way if project activity didn't happen. And that's a big assumption. That means that when we were choosing the control schools, they had to resemble the project schools in many ways, culturally, economically, ethnicity-wise, all these points. And the best way and that's not possible, to be honest, but we tried to do our best, and basically we ended up having the neighboring region. With yellow, we can see the project ones, and with orange, the chosen control ones. The other people from academia, probably, who is in the audience, probably will know that in social science, in order to measure something, you need to break it down into the items basically questionnaires, questions in the questionnaire. And group of them form some sort of construct. So in this project, we had to measure a number of different social constructs, like accountability of school staff. How do you measure this thing? Responsiveness of school staff. How do you measure it? So we ended up like having 3 to 5 different questions. We would take an average of that, and then that would represent the level of that social construct. That's just kind of in 5 minutes. Okay. The orange one, it's the value of the construct at the baseline and the end line. As I said, we also did the control one, and you can see the natural development that would have been without project anyway. And the difference is the impact of the project. And you can see all of these constructs went up, some to a great extent, some to the less extent, but nevertheless, it was really positive. Okay, I think I'll, can you help? Oh, okay. Okay, PDO 3 and 1. Parent empowerment, that was good. I'll just skip to the one that I actually want to highlight. Basically, in brief, all these things were good. All indicators went up, which was good, except for this one. And this is probably, I wanted to keep that because this indicator showed really negative impact of the project. And then when we started to analyze what actually happened, we understood that this indicator was designed pre-COVID. But actually, when COVID happened, it revealed the problem with the question itself. The intention was to measure the engagement of poor families, and we were hoping to see that by the end of the project, poor families would be engaged more into the education process. And when we saw that, we were like shocked. And then looking into that into greater detail, what actually we realized that it's not the engagement level changed, but it was 2 variables that were changing at the same time: engagement and the proportion of the poor people in the community, sorry. So it's not the engagement that impacted that, but simply it became, communities became poorer. And it was 2 things changing, and that's why we couldn't kind of split and identify which was which. But obviously we could see that, yeah, people became more poor. That was the main explanation for all these indicators to go down. Okay. Academic performance of the school students went up as well, which was interesting because project didn't do anything in terms of trying to improve the academic performance of school. It just worked with the environment of school. But it was interesting to see that it's actually resulted in school children showing better performance, which was good. There was a number of some reason this one is really glitchy. There was a number of interesting lessons learned. Of course, I mean, COVID-19, I think everyone by now knows the impact of COVID-19. What is happening? Is someone pressing something? I'll just probably just from my memory, I will say a few things on that. Basically, it was all positive impact. It was interesting findings which were not planned at the beginning. One thing which kind of stood out is that one big area still remains an issue, which is how people handle money collected by parents, because there is still a gray area, and in the end of the day, no one kind of knows how what to do with it, because schools do need funding, but it cannot go through kind of public funds, because we had a number of issues when the public fund owners would run away with the money. Officially, what people should do, they should collect money, they should send money to the government. There is a special казначейский счет. You have to send it to the government, and the government will take that money and then say, okay, I need a toilet, or I need a new heating system. They will have to run a tender. For that tender, they have to comply with the государственные закупки, special procedures set for the government to purchase things. And typically that would mean the cheapest stuff. And the cheapest stuff would normally break within a year or so. And that caused a number of basically delays, complications, and not quality work, etc. And as a result of that, I think one of the solutions that project ended up having is to form school associations. So basically, a few schools will get together, they will form a school association, they will send all their money there, and in that case, they would have a total control of these funds, and then legally, they could basically use that money the way they want. And that was an interesting, unexpected result, which was interesting. There were a number of other ones, which I don't have time for, but if someone is interested in that, you can actually either request a report from Agahan, or we're here to talk. We can talk about that later.
Thank you, Temirlan. Great work, and really looks interesting. I assume there are questions from the audience. Yeah. Can we get the mic, please?
Yes, Gulsaadat, AUCA. Just for clarification, the graphics that you have shown, it seems that the control schools, they have higher values in the baseline period, right? I mean, in most of the graphics, than the kind of the schools where the intervention was upheld. Just in most of the, so was it done intentionally? You chose better schools for the comparisons. And so the results were quite effective, and the project was quite effective. But have you noticed any variations across regions? So in some regions, for example, and if yes, then what do you think are the major factors that actually contributed to kind of, better results in a particular region? Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. It's a really good question. Firstly, as for the starting position, the schools that were given to the project, they were the poorest and the least good performing ones. They were selected that way by the Ministry of Economy and Science, Education and Science. And that's not surprising that we see the starting value being higher in the control schools than in the project ones, because by definition they were there. That's answering the first question. And the second is if there was any variation between the regions, and if yes, then why? That is one of the things which kind of nags me all the time, because we have so much data, not only on that project, on many other projects, and so many interesting stuff could be done with it, but simply no time for that. And just we usually just working to address the questions that we were given. And yes, to be honest, it's potential to dig and identify the differences, and trying to see the actual drivers of change for that specific context would be really, really nice. But that work was not done. Yes, and hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you for presentation. One question I have on the results on poor households. So one question on how did you identify poor household for both?
Yeah.
For both baseline and also for the impact
That is
end line, right? And the second question is on number of schools. So for who were participated in the project, maybe I missed it, but just.
a really good question. Thank you very much. And because the one of the implementers and donors of this project was World Bank, and I believe you also involved with that institution, we actually had an issue with that. One of the indicators said, can you have a look what's happening with poor households and non-poor households? Is there any difference? The question is, how do I identify poor and non-poor? This is kind of like almost philosophical question. But I mean, we decided, okay, poverty, it's economic, not like only like other ways, because poverty could be defined in many other ways. We meant economic poverty. Then we started looking through different literature, and there was Joanna Todler, I think back then, she was in Aga Khan Foundation, and she suggested, because she was closely, I believe, working with another team who developed something called Poverty Probability Index. Because we didn't want to go to with the path that our National Statistics Committee goes. It's who knows like how National Statistics Committee does that. It's like, it's a huge survey. It's basically you need to say how much macaroni, meat, what's your basically expenditure for each item, and they collect it for a month, I think. And yeah, it's very complicated methodology. And the main focus of this research was not that. We wanted to find an easy way how to do it. And the Poverty Probability Index gave that. But there was a problem with that because we use different proxy questions. For example, do you have a car? Do you have a land? How many livestock do you have? And basically answering these questions, proxy questions, we would say this is a poor household or not. That was, for our purposes, that was enough. So at the end line, that poverty probability index.
Где сидит?
Hi, everyone.
Вот они, вот они.
Нет, это не я говорю. I'm Kanykey Jailobaeva. I was also in the team which implemented baseline and endline studies. So thank you for that question. So we use the same methodology at baseline and endline. So the tool that Temirlan just mentioned, and we actually ran into the problems at baseline stage because the tool was developed back into 2012. And it is used in different contexts, but it wasn't necessarily adjusted to the context of Kyrgyzstan. And we made a lot of recommendations in the report already at the baseline stage. And at the endline stage, we discussed this extensively with the Aga Khan Foundation, how to address this. But because we needed to apply the difference in difference approach, we needed to make sure that our methodology is consistent. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to compare the baseline and endline data. So for that reason, after discussions, we have opted for keeping the same tool, but making some adjustments, and we took on board the recommendations from the stakeholders involved. But in a nutshell, just to reiterate, yes, we use the same tool at both points of time. And also methodologically, we were interested whether there are other ways of measuring poverty. And one of the ways we thought that it's subjective. So from the perception of respondents themselves. So we added a question on that. But again, because we were asked to ensure consistency, we relied on the data coming from PPI. And another point that I wanted to make is on PDO4, which looked whether the involvement of parents, poor and non-poor parents, increased at the end line. And Temirlan just showed us that the result was negative. And one thing to emphasize is that it was because of the COVID. So, and we know from other sources, from other studies in Kyrgyzstan, that indeed, because of the lockdown and other consequences coming from that, poverty rates, they went up. So that explained why that indicator showed negative result, because the poverty increased. So it is a study very exciting and insightful in terms of tools to be used for poverty, but definitely what we learned that PPI tool needs to be adjusted because a number of questions are not relevant for the context of Kyrgyzstan, especially measuring poverty in urban and rural context. Even like for urban, do you have a lamp lot? Is already like questionable, or do you use a car while probably public transport is much better in cities, for example. But we had to make some decisions methodological to stay consistent with the approach. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our speaker and contributors. I hope we will have few minutes maybe at the end of the session if our colleagues will be quick, but if not, then suggest you speak during the reception and clarify your questions. Now, I'd like to turn to Aida, I believe. Yeah, this is the sequence you decided to present. So Aida, floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Let me present myself. My name is Aida Abdyldaeva. I'm an M&E officer at the Advancing Nutrition Project, and I'm here to present the presentation about the nutritious status of children and women and nutrition interventions, particularly results of baseline and midterm surveys. And this presentation is divided into 4 parts. First of all is overview of the nutrition status in Kyrgyzstan. Second part is project design and our approach. Third is the results, baseline and midterm survey methodology. And the last part is the result itself. Can we skip? Thank you. Thank you. According to the most recent research that we had in 2018, the multiple indicator cluster survey in the Kyrgyz Republic, we got this kind of results. 12% of children aged from 0 to 5 years suffer from stunting. Stunting is, according to the World Health Organization, is impaired growth and development that children experience from poor nutrition, repeated infection, and inadequate psychological stimulation. So the highest levels of this childhood stunting are seen in Jailobaev, 16%, Osh 14%, Isikul 14%, and Batken 12%. And at the same time, 7% of children at the same group were overweight. This proportion reaches to from 9 to 12% in some area due to the high consumption of fatty foods, which is very common into Kyrgyz cuisine. Besides that, 42.6% of children suffer from iron deficiency anemia in the results of malnourishment and malnutrition. So this kind of, due to this high level of stunting anemia, only 40% 46% of children between 0 to 6 months were exclusively breastfeeded. And the median duration of this breastfeeding is just 2.2 months, when the minimum amount of months that World Health Organization suggests is minimum 6 months. So the status is very sad because it's only 2.2 months. Also, 77% of children continue breastfeeding up to 1 year, and only 22% receive breast milk through the age of 2 years, when it's very crucial for children to receive the breast milk up to 2 years. 60% of children receiving the minimum diversified diet, only 43% of children aged from 6 to 23% or 23 months, receiving the minimum allowable diet, and particularly in Batken Oblast, only 1 from 10 children receiving the minimum acceptable diet, which is the very low. In order to address these issues, Advancing Nutrition Project aims to increase uptake of 11 evidence-based nutrition practices through 2 main channels. First one is from under the objective 1, which includes the improvement of nutrition related behaviors through changing social behavior, change at the individual, household, and population level. We are doing this through community volunteers. So we are educating them on the main topics, and they convey these messages to the households directly. Second channel is through improvement of quality of nutrition services within the health system. We're doing this by training health worker in these villages, particularly in FGPs and FAPs. So we're trying to reach the households through 2 channels, like from the 2 sides. And these channels, as I already said, promotes 11 nutritional practices, which includes the optimal breastfeeding, appropriate complementary feeding of children, dietary diversity, reduced consumption of high-calorie and low nutrient density foods, the consumption of iron, folic acid, and also hygiene. So we combine these 11 practices into 9 modules and educate activists to promote them to households. Here you can see how our areas look. We, as a previous presenter said, we also have this design in the project. We divided our target villages into 2 areas. First one is intervention areas, second is comparison areas. It was done to compare how our intervention affect to the population, and see and compare in the areas where we did this intervention and we didn't, and where we didn't. In the first year of the project, we did interventions in the intervention area, and in 2022 we completed interventions. It includes community, working with communities and health workers in comparison areas. I also wanted to note that in Batken we have 91, in intervention zones we have 91 villages, and Jailobaev in 97. And we work only in 3 rayons in Batken. It's Batken, Leylek, and Kadamjay. And in Jailobaev we are working in 4 rayons, is Suzak, Noken, Bazarkorgon, and Aksy. In Jailobaev we have, in comparison zones, we have 126 villages, and in Batken it's 72 villages. So the purpose of the baseline and midterm survey of the baseline, it was to define the baseline level of our indicators that were based on 11 nutritional practices and highlight those practices that was in the minimum level, and to focus our interventions to these indicators. So, and the midterm survey was done to see the midterm level of the indicators and to compare the baseline and midterm results. So by the time we conducted midterm survey, we finished our all activities in intervention area, and when we were about to start in comparison area. So we measured the level how our activities affected to the intervention zones only. So the design and methodology of the study was that we collected our data through remote telephone interview. This method was chosen because we started our baseline study during the pandemic, and we had to do this phone survey. The data collection tool was the questionnaire consisting of 12 modules that was divided according to these 11 practices. And the respondents were women of reproductive age with children under 2 years old. The average interview length was 31 minutes because we couldn't hold the respondents longer than that, and we rely on the results. So the survey period of baseline was October-November, and midterm was November-December of 21st year. So the sample of the baseline study was 2091, and midterm study was 2,234 respondents. Actually, our target sample was 3,080, but we could reach only this number because there was a lot of dropouts during the interview because of the length of the interview. But also, these questions were pretty complex, despite the fact that we gave the compensatory for after the interview. So the geography of the research, you can see here, we have 31 Jailobaev in Batken, in 36 Jailobaev in Jailobaev. Field works were done like this. 30 operators, 3 controllers and supervisors were involved during this interview. Supervisors were checking these interviews, 5% of calls every day. And in the beginning of each research, we have collected around 30,000 phone numbers, but reached only around 2,000. So the main limitation of the phone survey, as we notice, is that it's very difficult to establish the contact with the respondent. So they could drop during the interview very fast in the beginning, and we couldn't hold them despite any other explanations that we gave them. And also another limitation is that the questions itself were very hard to grasp through this telephone because it was pretty big. You can imagine there are 11 practices, and we have to ask very detailed questions about each of them. And as I said, was early refusals. And the last one is verification issues. We had questions like, do you have the soap or the place where you can wash your hands? And they would, of course, answer yes, but we couldn't go and see that. This kind of question where we needed to verify, but we didn't have any chance. So next part is data analysis. We did the very common descriptive statistics for the calculation of our project indicators, and also, as the previous presenter saying, we use the difference in difference analysis to see how our interventions in intervention and comparison area are different to this point. So when it comes to socio-demographic profile of respondents, we have both in baseline and midterm survey. It was in Jailobaev and Batken, it was almost 50% in both oblasts. In the intervention and comparison also was like 50 to 50. The average age of the most respondents were around 30 to 40 years. The education level, both in baseline and midterm survey, was the same. And what is interesting that in number of households during the baseline, the highest number was that in most households there are 5 to 7 people, which is very important for us because we can see how many people are living together and share the same nutritional habits. Okay. One of the topics that we covered during these surveys is the prenatal care of pregnant women, which is very important for the nutrition of the children. Is that we have such information that the prenatal care during pregnancy, during the baseline, we had such results that 62% of women went to health facility during pregnancy, and during the midterm, it decreased to 6%. So, and it is statistically significant. And also, we looked to the level of education of these women, and we saw the clear connection between the level of education and how many times the mother visit the health facility. And the higher the education, the more frequently pregnant women went to health facility because they could understand and they knew how important it is. Maybe we could skip to another, straight to the nutrition practices of women. Yeah, next, because I have very limited time. Maybe next. What comes to the nutrition practice of women and children, we have seen that 76% of respondents consumed from 6 to 15 types of food during the day preceding the survey. We were asking about what kind of food they were eating during the 24 hours. And we discovered that there are mean number of food groups that were consuming both mothers and children is around 6-7, when there are 10 very important food groups that they have to intake for good health. Also, another discovery is that majority of women, particularly 88%, have a minimum permissible diet. It's also 5 out of 10. And the most consumed products are from the vegetables are the red pepper, vegetables such as cabbage and cucumber, tomatoes, eggplant, that is very popular in our country. And what comes to the breastfeeding, dietary diversity of children, and that particularly the breastfeeding, we have here very good results under this project that during the baseline in the intervention zones, we had 52% of children that were exclusively breastfeeded till 6 months, which is very important for children. And during the midterm evaluation, we this number increased to 55%, and it is statistically significant. This was one of the main indicators in our project that has very improved. And it is very also important to see that due to these interventions, the comparison areas were not affected by these interventions. However, in other indicators, we have seen that both in intervention and comparison areas, most of our indicators were increasing at the same time. But in this case, we have seen that in comparison zones where we didn't work, it decreased, and in the intervention zones where we worked, it increased. Another interesting part that I want to discuss here. Can we skip to the gender, women's power and decision making on nutrition? Предпоследний слайд. Можно? So we had this additional module during the midterm where we wanted to evaluate the decision-making power of women in nutrition, and we were asking the degree of women's involvement in decision-making process in 4 main modules. It's EBF, exclusive breastfeeding, complementary feeding, the budgeting, and hygiene. And we discovered that most of women said that they have this decision-making power regarding these topics. Also about almost 80% of women spoke their minds about introducing the complementary food and breastfeeding exclusively, purchase of nutrition-rich foods, and providing the hand washing facilities. So these are only those women who said that they have raised their voice about this, but there were many women who said that they did not raise their voice about this opinion. And here I want to conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Aida. As agreed, I think we will listen to both speakers and then ask questions after it, because content is related to the same intervention. So Philipp Schröder, floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Hello. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. So thank you, Damir. In order to present myself, I'm coming from the same organization today as Tilman and Damir, the ISDC. No. It is working? It sounds a bit like it's working. Okay, so it's from the same organization, the ISDC, International Security and Development Center in Berlin, but I also have a second head, which explains my methodological approach. I'm an adjunct professor for social anthropology at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. And I'm now happy to maybe also see the presentation and tell you a bit. A bit more, yeah, exactly, thank you. A bit more in detail about what I have contributed to this excellent project that Aida and Nurgul are running here. So insights from the USAID's Advancing Nutrition project in Kyrgyzstan on nutrition, gender, and decision-making, which is, oh, now it's working, which is a nice continuation from Aida's presentation. To give you a broad overview, I'm introducing a little bit less than I thought originally, something about the background of the project, because we have heard from Aida about that a lot, yeah, and a lot more elaborate than I can put it. And but I will say a bit something about the purpose of the gender study, about the research design and themes, about some exemplary findings for which I picked what I consider as an anthropologist is most interesting, that is the household budget. And then some general insights into the gender nutrition nexus and some hypothetical recommendations for us also to discuss a bit the transition and translation from research into application. Yeah? So, yes, I think I don't have to repeat that. This is basically a snapshot screenshot from the website. Yeah, you have heard about that from Aida a lot. And what I want to focus on here is the social behavior change, and especially the dynamic of social behavior change in communities in Batken and Jailobaev, and the focus on how that relates to gender and the negotiation of gender roles. So the purpose that is meaningful for what I'm going to present today is that the project tries to increase decision-making, the decision-making power of women in the areas of intervention and in the nutrition domain more generally. And the task for our qualitative study was to understand better the gendered norms, practices, and especially the barriers of how people can increase this decision-making power and the impact of SBC messaging. Yeah, what you can see in the picture on the left side is an example of this, of one SBC message, which talks about the nutrition of children starting from 6 months to 2 years and how you can accomplish a more caring and a more, well, loving attention, yeah, to them while you're providing them with food. So the research design and themes, as I said before, as an anthropologist, my research design usually is a qualitative one. So we have a sample size of, well, an economist would say only, I would say 36 interviews and 14 focus group discussions. As I said before, we have focused that on 2 regions, which is Batken and Jailobaev. And I think very interestingly, we have looked at 4 social groups and we have talked to them separately, which is the fathers and the mothers of these children, but also in order to have a generational component, the mothers-in-law and the fathers-in-law. Yeah, because I mean, at least at the level of the household, they are very, very important decision makers. Yeah, we can say. So I think having a more comprehensive and holistic view on the household is very important here. And also we wanted to get, of course, different angles, yeah, on how they see decision-making going on and unfold in their households. So the gender study itself covered 6 themes, which attach and align to what Aida has presented. Feeding, which includes breastfeeding and complementary feeding, hygiene and sanitation, dietary diversity and anemia, food storage and preservation, household budgeting, on which I will be focusing today, and SBC messaging. What I wanted to do with this slide here is to give you a bit of an insight, yeah, into the primary data that we collected. So this is a screenshot from the MaxQDA software that we use for the qualitative data analysis. And I wanted to quickly go through and take a lot of my time here to show you how the complexity of decision-making might unfold at the household level. Yeah, so if you follow me on this right side where you can basically see the interview dialogue, yeah, you can see who is getting the product. Yeah, the husband is getting the product. How often does he do that? Yeah, he buys it very often. Who decides what to get? And then the mother, who is the respondent, yeah, says, I usually tell him what to get. Yeah, I know what we have and we don't have. And I usually cook food 2 times a day, you know, for lunch and for dinner. And then we're asking further, yeah, how is the budget formed at your family? And then the answer is we decide together. Who keeps the budget? The father-in-law keeps the budget, yeah? So, and if we keep track, we already have 3 different actors, yeah, being involved. We have the mother, the father, and the father-in-law, yeah? And then I think the next, we can skip a bit. Does your husband work or not? Yeah. But what I wanted to show you with just this example is that if we talk about joint decision-making at the household level, I think we have to break it down into a social process that has different components. And what you can see from this example is that you have already 3 different practices. This is listing the products, this is getting the products, and this is managing the money. And the 2 are in an interplay, and it's not very obvious to say which one is the decisive one. Because when we then talked, can you go back? Slide. The other, because when we then talked to women especially, and we during the interviews asked them, well, what if you are preparing a list that is really, really long, for your husband? What will happen then? Well, the husband said, well, of course I will not get it. I cannot, I don't have this money to spend. And we confronted the women with the same answer. They said, well, because I'm listing the products, even if it doesn't bring back this product today, I'll just put it on the list for the next time. And this is already very interesting in terms of the gender dynamics, because how can you really say, who is really the powerful one in that relationship? But you have at the same time an indication of where you can go, and how complex this decision making is. So I think, yes, now we can go to the next slide. And if we move a bit towards the more general findings on the household budget, what was very striking to us, but I think what is attaching to a lot of the presentations that we have heard today, is that food expenses have been very much increasing, for different reasons during the past, let's say, 3 years, starting from now. Starting with COVID, and starting with regular inflation, and starting now with the Ukraine-Russia crisis and so on. So what was very striking for us is that basically all households responded that they spend at least 50% of their budget and income for food. And I would say, even though this is of course not a representative study, it's a qualitative study, but most of the households that we talked to, this number reached up to 80%. And so that already tells you that household budgeting and the gender nutrition nexus is important, because you're basically spending almost all of the money that flows into a household into purchasing nutrition items. And then, and then if you remember the quote that I had on the previous slide, the woman was referring that she was cooking multiple meals per day. And we also found that in the study communities a lot, that there is a certain impact, and of course, in regards to the household expenditure, negative impact, if there are multiple hot meals being prepared every day. So what we found, and was interesting, a difference between Jailobaev and Batken a bit, is that in Jailobaev less than in Batken, there was a reservation against, heating the food up again that was prepared during the day. So eating, in inverted commas, leftovers was less of a stigma and maybe a hesitation in Batken, but was more pronounced in Jailobaev as something that households would not do. This is something that we found. But the impact of eating multiple hot meals per day and eating fresh food and freshly prepared food, or what is culturally noted as freshly prepared food, is, I think, just very important. And it links directly to this 50 to 80% of the monthly income being spent on food. What we can clearly see or saw, from the interview example, was that each household member has an own angle of power. I told you about the 3 practices, the listing, the getting, and the keeping the money. So I think this is also something that we have to take into account, especially if we speak about something such as joint decision making. So if joint decision making means that everyone has equal power, then we have to break it down into the different components and look more exactly which are the different practices and who's controlling which practice. And I think this is providing a certain avenue for intervention, if you want to go in that direction. So, and the other thing maybe that I want to mention here is very important from a gender perspective is we had only very few women in our very small sample that were working in these regions. So of course, more pronouncedly in Batken than in Jailobaev. But those women who worked had significantly more leverage. in terms of deciding about the household budget, yeah, because a lot of times their income was not touched, yeah, so they could keep that income for themselves, yeah. That doesn't mean they spend it for themselves, yeah. They might spend it for food, for children, for clothes, and so on. There was a kind of collective family-oriented way of spending it, but it did not directly flow necessarily into this general household budget, yeah. And the other effect, of course, working women are important because they are prone to suffering from time poverty, yeah, but at the same time, this increases, let's say, the social pressure on other members of the household to step in. Yeah? Now we'll come to that already in the next slide. If you can move forward, I will. Yeah. So moving to these more general insights into this gender nexus and going beyond the household budgeting as a specific topic, we found that males act as temporary substitutes in cases of need. Yeah? And the question now is, what is a case of need? Yeah? And especially working women were considered to be cases of need, yeah, and legitimate reasons, yeah, for men to step in and temporarily substitute, yeah? Care, preparing food, doing household chores, also doing homework, yeah, these kind of things. But not more than temporary. And I think what is also important is that still there was a patriarchal hierarchy in play here, because we could clearly see that there is an order. If there is, let's say, the mother-in-law from the perspective of the daughter-in-law at home, then she would take over these tasks first, yeah, before this task was, so to say, distributed to another male in the household, yeah. So if we have extended families living together, usually it's first, let's say, the mother of the child taking care. If she's unavailable for what reason, it would be the mother-in-law, and then only males would kind of take over, yeah, this role. In core family settings, yeah, which is of course rather to be found in urban areas, this would be, you know, switched around. And then of course the husband would be more involved right from the beginning because of the absence of other females, yeah, in the household. So in comparison to other studies that we have done before on the topic of household nutrition and gender, it was very interesting to see that this time in this research, we didn't find any attempt from the male side to culturally legitimize, yeah, a passiveness. Yeah, we found a certain passiveness that they have here. They were reluctant to contribute. They were temporarily, selectively contributing only, and they tried to avoid, yeah, these chores. But there was no cultural legitimization, yeah, such as Kyrgyz men would not step into the kitchen and prepare food, yeah, or Islam forbids us to take care of this or take care of that. There was no such strong resistance for cultural reasons not to get involved. Yeah, so I think this is an interesting finding, because we can also look at things that do not happen and learn something from them instead of only, it's a beautiful 5 that you draw, instead of only looking at what is actually going on. Yeah, so that led us to the result to say, well, there is a gender division of labor, but it is handled rather pragmatically, yeah, than ideologically. Yeah? Ideologically would mean that for maybe cultural reasons you are rejecting, yeah, to take over a certain task, yeah. But pragmatically would mean in cases of need. I have outlined some of these situations that are considered cases of need. This, let's say, patriarchal systemic approach can be adjusted, yeah. Not fully, not reversed, yeah, but it can be adjusted. There is a possibility to adjust, yeah. And if we take maybe already a further analytical step back, then what we found interesting in the study is to use this CAP approach, which is knowledge, attitude, and practices, because we found different results on each of these levels. Yeah. So in terms of knowledge, and this really concerns all the 6 themes, yeah, that we have covered in the gender study, starting from feeding, sanitation, preservation, and all the 6 I mentioned before, we found that there is a pretty solid knowledge base. Yeah. So people were aware. Of course, women were a lot more aware than men, but they were also sharing these insights with men, and men said in the focus group discussions and the interviews that they were also receptive, yeah, to this knowledge. So I would say the knowledge situation is solid. Yeah, can always be improved, but solid. That was one of the conclusions we had. The other is that there is generally an open attitude, yeah, And the open attitude is something that I meant with that gender division is existing, but it's handled pragmatically and not ideologically. Yeah? There's an openness for change. Yeah? New information can come into the household. Yeah? It is discussed. There are certain adjustments that we could clearly identify. For example, that young women brought new recipes into the household, yeah, and the men and the other members of the household, they were receptive, yeah, to these new recipes, yeah. New recipes in that sense always meant also healthier recipes, yeah, non-traditional, but let's say exceptions to the regular Kyrgyz traditional food cycle, yeah, that you can find especially in rural areas. So as Aida also outlined in her presentation, yeah, we could find that women's voices are not only heard, but they are also acted upon, yeah, but in a very selective way, yeah, and to express this selectiveness, limitedness, and also temporariness, we found that we could call this as something like a pragmatic conservatism, yeah, that there is generally a conservative attitude that still favors, let's say, the patriarchal existing structure, but there is an ability to pragmatically adjust to that, yeah, such as changing food rotations, yeah, to a certain extent, males and other members of the household stepping in for mothers, yeah. So it's a mixed result, yeah, we can say, but you will always find mixed results if you're doing a qualitative studies, but you have to qualify in which ways, yeah, they are mixed. So this brings me, I think, in accordance with the time, to the last slide, yeah. What I wanted to do here is also maybe for our discussion to present you with some hypothetical recommendations, yeah, that we could give to this project in terms of adjusting certain interventions, yeah, and these are basically ideas, yeah, and I think what is very important is that these ideas are proposed and then they are discussed and they are assessed in terms of feasibility in regards to what the project is able to do, yeah, and what the policy of the project is, the theory of change, yeah, and so on. But what we found, and therefore we developed this first recommendation, is that there is a certain common interest among the mothers-in-laws and the daughters-in-laws, which is mediated through the mobile phone about exchanging news on new recipes, yeah, and everyone we talked to said that this is kind of a new development that brings the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law a bit closer together than it used to be, yeah, because they're exchanging them through Instagram, yeah, through other kind of social media, and it gives them a platform to discuss about how, yeah, the nutrition of the family could be adjusted, yeah, and how new things can be introduced into the household diet and so on. So one consideration that we could have is what ways are there towards forming female cross-generational alliances, yeah? And how can we shape maybe tangible role models, yeah? And one of the tangible role models that we can discuss is something like a modern mother-in-law. That is something that I did not think of, but that came directly out of one of the focus groups. Well, I'm a modern mother-in-law, that's why I'm sharing with my daughter-in-law the recipes, yeah, and we're thinking about it together. And if you think about the complexity of the decision-making at the household level, you would already have two of the practices combined, yeah, with one, which is usually keeping the money and listing the products, yeah. If that money is kept by a mother-in-law, which often it is, yeah, then you already have kind of an inroads into shaping change, yeah, if that is the aim you're going after. The other one, and that directly relates to what I said before, that there is a solid knowledge base and open attitude, but the practical level is still pragmatically conservative. That means maybe instead of trainings, a project could think about to enable practical experience, yes, for those who are considered their stakeholders here and beneficiaries. And one cultural notion that we found very noteworthy is that all the households basically had a refrigerator and a freezer, and they were freezing, let's say, fruits, yeah, and different kind of berries and so on. But they're very hesitant to freeze vegetables because they said, well, once vegetables are frozen, to defreeze them, yeah, that would not make for fresh food. Yeah, and that is something that those who have a freezer and are actually practicing freezing vegetables, they were totally against that. Yeah, in the focus group discussion, again, there was a receptiveness, yeah, towards listening to them. Yeah, but I think kind of creating change through practice would be a way, yeah, to convince even more people, yeah, that this might be actually an effective and especially cost-efficient way, yeah, for households to reduce their spending. And one idea that you can have, or that we could discuss, is what if you have village-based cooking competitions? Yeah, because it's a hands-on practice, and when we suggested something like that during the focus groups and also during the interviews, males they were more responsive to something that is, you know, a competition, a social event, yeah, that we thought maybe that is also a way to tie males more positively towards this whole topic and theme of nutrition. Yeah, all is up for discussion. Yeah, and the final thing, before Damir shows me the 1 minute sign. One could, you know, thinking about that 50 to 80% of the household income is spent on food, increasing the notion of a family meal, yeah, which means maybe not preparing 2 to 3 dishes, sometimes 3 dishes per day, preparing different dishes for different members of the household, yeah, more nutritious dishes, heavy dishes, energetic dishes, yeah, however they are called for the men, you know, and other dishes for children and women or elders. Yeah, that was also often the case. Yeah, that light food was considered needed to be prepared for elders. Maybe there is a way to increase the notion of a family meal, which can also include leftovers. Yeah, that there is maybe not something negative about eating leftovers, and that can have positive effect potentially for the household budget, at least in these times. Yeah? And I'm done. Yeah.
Thank you, Philipp. Now it's time for questions and responses. We are not many, but I hope there will be questions. I myself have a couple of them. Tilman, please.
Thank you for very stimulating presentations. Given that Philipp talked last, it's easiest to ask him first. 3 quick questions. The first one is, are these results, you think, typical for Kyrgyzstan, or do they sort of generalize? You know, are they results that you might have found elsewhere, or is this all context specific? The second thing was your findings, do they in a sense relate more to food or more to gender, or is it, you know, what's the intersectionality of those 2 things? Yeah, you discussed a lot the gender relations, yeah, and I wondered to what extent are they food specific, so to speak, or yeah, I hope you understand my question, but otherwise I'll expand. And my third question, I forgot, so I stick with 2 and give more time to other people.
To answer your third question first. No, I think to speak about whether it's typical or not, I think there might be variations in degrees. Yeah, I think we would find probably similar results. What at least we would call similar results, yeah, in northern Kyrgyzstan, but they would vary to a certain degree, yeah, from those that I now presented. Yeah, so there might be, let's say, if a young woman has the opportunity to introduce one new dish into the regular traditional food cycle in the areas that we considered, yeah, because they're rather rural, they're rather traditional, yeah, to really use these stereotypes to a certain extent, then in northern Kyrgyzstan we might find 2, yeah, or 3, but we would not find a principal difference. But you know, that's also an estimate. Yeah? It's not an evidence-based finding that I can relate, but I would expect to find variations in degrees, yeah, and not in kind. Yeah? And well, whether the results are gender and or food specific. Let's say if we go through the 6 themes, yeah, that I discussed, but they were covered in the gender study, yeah. For all of them, the young women or also the elder female members of the household are considered to be responsible. Yeah, so it is their
task, yeah, to bring in the knowledge, yeah, to decide which food is to be prepared, yeah, to negotiate which food is to be prepared. And you could clearly see that there also through the project there is a strive, yeah, towards expanding, yeah, the regular food cycle. So in that sense, you have the women a lot involved in this debate, yeah, but the question is then who in the end is deciding about that, yeah? But you could, I don't know, it's difficult to say. It was also a difficult question because I think I have to think about it. Do you want to qualify the question? Maybe that helps. Ah, okay. Yeah.
Just let me clarify from the implementer perspective. So recent data shows that decision made on nutrition and health are more better than decisions are made jointly. This is FAO dates, and so we decided in our project approach to use this and try to address nutrition and health improvement through gender transformative messages and incorporate into our modules into our nutrition related interventions, gender transformative messages, and what we ask Philipp to do is to assess how feasible and what kind of result it can be, not just going through our 2 channels described by Aida earlier in presentation. So, and it seems like that gender should be and women empowerment should be part of interventions, nutrition interventions.
Thank you for contribution.
Yeah,
please.
yes, first of all, thank you very much for very interesting presentations. And I have a question for Philipp. Yes, it's exciting to see that you used anthropological approach to dig into these questions, and also exciting to see the way you analyze the data and develop different concepts around the findings. And some of the concepts are actually well, not something that I experienced and I would assume, but probably that's based on my common sense and everyday experience as a part of the Kyrgyz community. But nevertheless, I wanted to ask whether this was just one-off data collection, or did you have, or did you collect data at several points of time? And I just want I was wondering about the sustainability of these results that you showed us, especially around the involvement of men, because my assumption was that it is a challenge to bring about like long-term changes in the behavior. So yes, I think from a methodological perspective, was it one of data collection? And a second, probably more kind of hypothetical, if it was one of data collection, then do you think that these findings will have a long-term effect? Or whether we could see some kind of going down trend in the long term. Yeah, thank you.
Well, for this study, that was a one-time data collection event. But what made me a bit more confident to speak about this pragmatic conservatism, and this kind of thing, is that I have conducted many others and also long-term anthropological studies here in Kyrgyzstan. For example, on behalf of UN Women, where we had a lot larger sample, also quantified data, and so on. So I think this is at least a concept that we can work with. I mean, we can always to a certain extent agree with it or not, but that's what makes it a valuable concept. Yeah. We don't have to all agree on it. Yeah. So I think, again, finding the variation in it is what is exactly interesting. Yeah. And we will find a lot of variation, let's say, comparing urban and rural contexts. Yeah. Comparing a northern and a southern context. Yeah. Let's say. Comparing across ethnic contexts. Yeah. That is something we did in a large study for UN Women. Yeah. Also looking at Uzbek youth. Yeah. Russian youth in Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyz youth. So there was this kind of general applicability that I found in this concept before. Yeah, not saying that it can be generalized, yeah, across the whole country, because no serious anthropologist would ever claim that. Yeah, but it's something we can think with. Yeah, the original notion, yeah, of a concept. Yeah. And then we have been discussing a bit, yeah, to which degree we can witness a trend, yeah, of especially daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law coming closer together, yeah, to which degree this relationship has changed also across generations. Yeah. And now this wasn't a task for this study, yeah, because we were focusing mostly on younger women, yeah, and daughters-in-law, yeah, and so on. But what I found striking was that that's also why I chose to present it, this incident of having a platform to discuss about the recipes, yeah, through social media, yeah, and a lot of participants in the interviews and focus groups, they were very excited about this, yeah. So there was a certain sense that they could grow together and come together, and it's not also only rhetorical, yeah, because when we asked about how diets changed, I don't know, they said that they introduced new diets, yeah, new kind of dishes into the rotation and so on. So just taking that indication, because there are not a lot of others, you know, from a small qualitative study, that was an hopeful one, yeah. But at the same time, I'm aware of the desirability bias, yeah, that during an interview and without participant observation and what a regular long-term anthropological study would contribute, yeah, you have to be careful, yeah.
Can I also ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Philipp? This is probably my personal kind of interest in that, because that is the question I was wrestling with for many years. Yeah. No, the thing is, you said about introducing new dishes, and which is great. But I'm trying to make a parallel with the situation that I normally see in the villages. And I would like to ask people like nutrition specialists, having another meal from the same ingredients, would it benefit much or not? Is it, I mean, what we're talking about, like potatoes, noodles, meat in different variations, yeah, typically. And I would like to know, is it like really in terms of nutrition value to the children, breastfeeding mothers and all those, is it significant difference, no difference? Or like whatever you think on that. Thanks.
I will hand over to both of you, because you're the specialists on that more than me. What I said in one sentence here during the presentation, which I might have to highlight a bit more, is that new dishes, the notion of new dishes always implied healthier dishes. Yeah, like a salad, you know, that wasn't prepared before. Yeah, so that is something that we encountered. Yeah, so not the exactly same ingredients, you know, just prepared in a different way, but also sometimes it's a different way of preparing them. Yeah, using less oil. Yeah, it's already, even with the same dish, helpful. Yeah, reducing, you know, let's say the amount of meat. Yeah, or I don't know, something like this. This is something we noted, but then I'll
complete the answer. So it is recommended, there is a 10 group of food recommended, and at least there should be five so ingredient product should represent at least 5, but it is still poor nutrition. So then if you have more than 5 out of 10, it's, of course, it's better. And also studies show that Kyrgyz diet is lack of vitamin C, vitamin A, iron, and zinc deficiency. So, and we promote products which are rich by these micronutrients. And our results shows that still we have 5 components, and this is mostly carbohydrates, it's углеводы. The vast majority of diet, Kyrgyz diet, is a carbohydrates and fat, but which is not giving that level of micronutrients which is needed, and why we pay special attention for children under 5, because it's a time for growing, development of brain, and that's why they need a full range of micronutrients, and they also need breast milk, because this is besides that this is the best food for child, this is also have immune factor, it's antibodies, it's like природные антибиотики, антитела.
Okay, so not to let Aida not to respond, maybe a couple of clarifications. So you conducted baselines and we saw midline. Does it mean you have endline? And secondly, 11 practices. Is it realistic to expect results on all of them? So a couple of short questions and short answers.
Yes, we are already starting to conduct endline study. It also in October this month, and we will after we will get these endline results, we will compare to the baseline and midterm, and also like do the conclusions from that, because we in this year we have finished the for our full activities in comparison zones, so we need to see the results. And regarding the second questions, yeah, we really hope to increase, have the results on all of these practices. However, we know, we aware of that fact that it is very hard to change the social behavior practices, like their habits, because it is the most difficult thing to change because of tradition, because of also economic things, like they contribute those products that they have in the market. And we are trying to, we're suggesting them to buy other fruits that are more like rich in nutrients, but they're not very like really available in the market, not that a lot. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great discussion. I think both projects were similar in many ways, a lot of data collection, a lot of diff results. I think it's really exciting to see that interventions are being surrounded by data collection, and we really want to learn. And I think we learned as well from our speakers, and I thank everyone who contributed today. I think we want to close the session and thank audience for joining, for asking questions, and